Travel and Things in association with Sun Destinations, iconic destinations with amazing experiences, present In Conversation With. I'm your host, David Batsoffen, and today I'm joined by Ted Loukes from G&T Tours. Ted, good morning. Welcome to you.
Hi, David. How are you? Good to be
Very,
here.
very well, thanks. And thanks for joining me. Egypt. It is a land of mystery and mysteriousness. What is it that drew you to Egypt?
Um, it's a long story. It goes back a long way. Let me
Right,
put it that way. Um, uh, as a child, I always had a fascination for ancient civilizations.
right.
And I think that what really sparked my interest in Egypt was as a 10-year-old being taken to the British Museum by my grandfather to witness the touring exhibition of 50 pieces that happened in 1972,
Mm-hmm.
where we queued for 11 hours just to get into the museum, and that kind of started my Egypt thing. And I think Egypt has stayed with me, and it's come and gone through my years. But I then got into it again because I was writing a series of blogs, and there was a one of the stories that I worked on was an Egypt story, and about an Egyptian pharaoh and his possible link to Moses, and that kind of reignited my Egypt flow, and I realized that I had to go there. And once I'd been there, that was it. It just took over my soul and life, and that's been it since, for the last 12 years, last 10 years. It's just
Yeah,
last 12 years, yeah.
because I was about to ask you, if I asked an 18-year-old Ted, somebody in matric, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? Would Egypt have been on the list? But you told me you were at the British Museum at 10. So it was there or thereabouts.
I think it was still there. That fascination with ancient civilizations has always been there, just to a lesser or greater degree. But
Right.
I think if you dug deeply, or you would have found that Egypt would still be on that list. It might not have been at the top, perhaps, but it would have been on that list somewhere. Absolutely, it is a fascinating place. It has an incredible history, and I think what I want to say before we go any further is what people perhaps don't understand is the incredible length of the Egyptian timeline. And if you drew a linear timeline and had, say, the construction of the pyramids at one end and
Right.
us at the other end, Cleopatra would be closer to us than she would be to the pyramids. That's
Really?
how long the Egyptian timeline is. So Cleopatra and certainly the Romans, they went and looked at things in Egypt because they were then antiquities already. There's Roman graffiti in
Yeah.
in the tombs in Valley of the Kings. You can go and read, Gaius Julius was here, on the wall. And I think that is just phenomenal. I don't think anywhere else on earth do we have such an amazing amount of
Hmm.
material that talks about a history for such a continuous period of time. I think that's part of the incredible draw that it has, and also the fact that there's stuff to see. There's lots of places have legends and stories about their past, their distant past, and
Right.
and their myths, their creation myths, and all of that. But Egypt, you can go and stand next to them and go, "Wow, this is amazing."
Yeah.
Um,
And realize how, as you say, how long ago it was actually built and how much of the earth, as we know today, had yet to be developed.
Absolutely, absolutely,
Yeah.
and that's why you see so many firsts, as far as civilizations were concerned,
Hmm.
coming from Egypt,
Would you
because they were
consider
just.
your, would you consider yourself an Egyptologist then?
I th- Egyptologist is a difficult term. I think I would prefix it with the word amateur, if anything.
Okay.
I think it is a recognized science, and there are Egyptologists who have studied and got their PhDs or whatever in the subject. So I think it would be somewhat arrogant of me to just say, yes, I am an Egyptologist. However, I'm quite happy for people to say he's an amateur Egyptologist.
Okay. Now, with that in mind, when and G&T Tours, I'm assuming is a tour company that you run, and you would take people to Egypt, or people go and visit like I did. I was there for 6 weeks. Unfortunately, didn't get to see much of anything because I was working. So I saw my hotel and the venue for 6 weeks, which
Shame.
wasn't a happy. It was a partly happy space, but we'll go back one day.
They must.
What should people look out for? You know, everybody goes to the souks and they go to the marketplaces and they go to the pyramids, and there are antiquities sellers by the droves who will sell you what they will tell you, you know, comes from 1 AD or something like that. And meanwhile, if you turn it over and scrape carefully, it'll says made in Taiwan in 2023 type of thing. How do people know what they're getting?
Look, I think as a tourist, and I presume we're talking from a tourist point of view.
Yes, we are.
You shouldn't be looking at any antiquities. Nobody should be offering you antiquities.
Right.
It's completely illegal, and if you're caught with antiquities, you could well face a prison sentence. It's very strictly controlled. And there are people, they go about faking stuff and making stuff look really old and tell you that it's like a couple of 1,000 years old and it came from wherever it came from. You've got to take it all with a pinch of salt. My approach to all of these buys is you've got to treat it like it's a game. Don't get taken in by the nonsense surrounding and the legend that's surrounding it. Look, there are people who will offer you stuff, especially if you're in out of the way places. They'll offer you stuff and you can go, that could well be, you know?
Yeah.
But my advice, just don't even go there. Just steer clear of it. It's very dangerous. And as a tourist, they don't care. The Egyptian police will put you in jail.
Yeah, I was going to say, buy a stuffed camel. It's
buy a stuffed camel.
At least you know
Indeed.
where that comes from, and you know how old it is. It was made yesterday.
There was a lady not so long ago who was stopped at Cairo International because she'd bought souvenirs, but the guys at customs at the airport suspected that they were real, and she was arrested and held for several days.
Really?
Before it was just, yes, because you know, you go to the souk and you buy like a little statue or something, and you've got no kind of provenance to it. There's no piece of paper that says, yes, this is genuine or this is only a replica or whatever.
Yeah.
And you go there and then you're trying to, you know, bluff your way or get through customs, and they're going, no. And they'll drag you off to jail. They will, and you don't want to go to an Egyptian prison.
I should imagine not. I'd prefer to stay in a hotel rather than to be at the mercy of the prison officials. That being said, though, talking about, you know, bartering or buying in a souk, when I was there, I got into a bit of a haggle over an item. I can't even remember what it was, until I realized that when I was there in October last year, the currency was in my favor quite radically. And all I was arguing about was like 50 cents. And I started laughing because I thought, what am I doing to this poor guy? He wants to sell me a bracelet, and I'm haggling over 50 cents. And then when I bought it from him at his price, he then gave me a bookmark, a papyrus bookmark, which was probably the 50 cents anyway. So I don't think he made much money.
You'd be surprised. Those guys selling stuff will never, ever sell you something at a loss to them.
Now, you see, I'm glad you said that, Ted, because I have this ongoing fight with people. When you go to certain places, they like the barter is part of the deal.
Yes.
You know what you want to pay. They know where their profit lies. And they will not go below. They will quite radically reduce a price if they still have a profit. But trust me, you are not denying their children food or anything like that, because they're not silly. They really and truly aren't. And they know they play on on foreign tourists on that sort of, oh, I don't want to take food off his table because this is all he has to make a living.
Absolutely. As I said earlier, you have to treat it as a game.
Yeah.
So the haggling is expected. It's part of the game. And once you've started communication, so when they say to you, "Hello, welcome in Egypt. Where you from?" and you say South Africa, and then they say Bafana Bafana, Nelson Mandela,
Yeah.
you've said, "Okay, cool. I'm going to play the game with you."
Yeah.
And then they will ask you an outrageous price. And I think what you have to do as an individual is say, yes, I'm prepared to spend X amount. That's what I want to spend on it. If you don't want to spend on it, walk away.
Yeah.
Just walk away. They'll follow you. They'll drop their price, they'll do whatever. But they will not, as you say rightly, they will not undercut themselves.
No.
I think it's a different story when it comes to tipping. I think people need to be aware that sometimes the tips are what sustain people.
Yeah.
And tipping is a way of life in Egypt. It's not a begging thing. It's an accepted way of life. If someone carries your luggage from the airport exit to a taxi or whatever, that's tippable. They expect it, and it is expected. And there, I think you can then think, well, yes, what I have in terms of my currency compared to their currency on a currency exchange thing, yes, you're probably quite rich compared to what the guys are getting. But, and I will emphasize this, don't pay them in like by tipping them a US dollar or a pound or a euro, because then they're stuck with that. They can't change it. The banks won't change it for them. So they've now got a useless coin that they've then got to go and pester somebody else to see whether they can change into Egyptian.
Yeah.
I think it's just about being thoughtful and
No,
caring.
I hear what
But
you said. I like the fact that you picked up on it, or started off by saying Bafana Bafana. When they found out that I was South African, they went Morocco Swallows. They were ecstatic, and they don't like their national squad. And Bafana Bafana is far better liked than people realize, specifically in North Africa. I've just come back from Morocco, and you step off the plane there and you go South Africa, and they go, thank you very much, because we beat Morocco for the African Cup of Nations. Ted,
yeah,
you
look,
very
soccer.
kind. Sorry, you were saying?
Yeah. No, I was just going to say that soccer is very big in those North African countries.
It is. And if you can find no other channels on their television, at least there's always a sports channel that you can watch, so that you can follow the game. You may not necessarily follow the commentary because it's in a language you don't understand, but it's there, rather than trying to watch some of the programs that I did, the talk shows from studios and the game shows. They're laughable, but that's another story for another time. Now, you very kindly sent me some images when we set this chat up, and I've got them here, and I'd like you to talk us through them, what the viewers are looking at, where they are, and why you chose these particular pictures.
Okay, this is Luxor. So Luxor's a long way south of Cairo, and it's the ancient capital, or the religious capital of the period of Egyptian history known as the New Kingdom. And the New Kingdom is the time of the perhaps the famous pharaohs like Ramses the Great and Tutankhamun and Akhenaten, Nefertiti. They're all from the New Kingdom. So this particular picture, what we're looking at, is a stretch of hillside that runs between the Valley of the Queens in the south to the Valley of the Kings. The Valley of the Kings is over the other side of that mountain.
Okay.
And this burial ground, because all of these openings that you can see are all tombs. And there's about 400 tombs across this stretch of hillside. And they're all the nobility of the time. So the vizier of such and such, or the mayor of Thebes, as Luxor was known in antiquity. So what we're doing, we're walking from the southern end, fairly high up, and we're walking down into the main central area where there are lots and lots of tombs, all next to each other. As you can see, the various entrances there. Yeah. So most of those
are these accessible to the general public, to tourists, or
Yes.
okay,
Yes, so usually, depending on what ticket structure you work with, but usually you can buy a ticket and it'll give you access to three of these tombs at a time, and then you can go into them. And usually the way these tombs worked is that they're not really a tomb as such. Well, they include the tomb, but the tomb is a burial chamber that's inaccessible,
okay,
usually underground or whatever. And this is more of a kind of like, it's not a mortuary temple as such, but it's a kind of celebratory chapel area where the family would come after the burial. The family
okay.
would come to celebrate that person's life, and it would be ongoing. They would come for festivals, and it would be lively, and people would be in and out of them. They weren't sealed up. The burial chamber inside would have been sealed
Okay.
up.
I must comment on the desert here, because as I've said, I've just come back from Morocco, and the sand there in the Sahara is very, very red, as opposed to this, which almost looks like beach sand.
Yeah, I think it's because of the rock uh,
Oh, pardon me. All
that we're
right.
on.
So,
So we're about uh, a few hundred meters from the edge of the floodplain. The
mhm.
floodplain. If you were to go on that picture, if you were to go to the right and down that hill, you'd suddenly hit green roads and agricultural land, and that's the old Nile floodplain before the building of the Aswan Dam in the
Okay.
late 60s, early 70s.
Oh, pardon me. I don't know why I've got a tickle in my throat.
No
Pardon.
problem.
Okay. So where are we now?
We're also in Luxor. And the reason I put this here is because Luxor is divided into two parts, really. There's the east bank of the river. Obviously, the river goes right through the middle of it. So the east bank is more the city side. It's where people work. There are offices. There are shops, supermarkets. The airport is that side. The railway station is that side. The west bank, which is where I prefer to stay, is far more rural, going into agricultural. And this is just one of those gorgeous streets in the back streets of Luxor that you can just walk along, and it's just gentle and peaceful. And you'll find like a little coffee shop or whatever shops just scattered down these back streets. And a lot of this was free time. It was when I was not actually leading a tour at the time. So I was just strolling around and just acclimatizing myself to the place. And it's a lovely place to just wander around and just take a walk, and completely safe. And I think
Okay.
that
I
what you
want to
want
tap
here.
into that, because you said one of those free time, and you had 40 days and 39 nights of free time when lockdown happened. Now, I don't know whether you were lucky to be locked down in Egypt, specifically seeing it's a place that you love, or was it just like, I don't know if I'm going to be here for the rest of my life?
Um, First of all, I would say yes, it was incredibly lucky. And I remember writing at the time and later, of all the places to be locked down,
Yeah.
this is exactly where I would want to be. And almost to the point that it was difficult communicating with people in case they thought I was having too much of a good time being stuck there. But look, it was a harrowing experience. There were nine of us. We were leading. I was leading a tour. There were nine of us. We'd kind of almost got to the end when suddenly all the flights were cancelled, and we were stuck here in Luxor. And at a later stage, the group kind of split, and some went to Cairo to be next to the airport, and
Mm.
I stayed in Luxor with another couple of people. Um, and yes, there were times where it was very dark and very scary, and we weren't sure what was going to happen, especially because I got COVID quite badly.
Mm.
And you must remember, this was in March 2020, so there was no medicine available.
Yeah,
There was
nobody knew
nothing.
what was about to hit us or what
No, and
was calling us.
we knew that the Egyptian quarantine was being run by the military, which was again a place that we just didn't want to go to, an Egyptian quarantine camp, not
Right.
in those early days. So it was difficult. On one side was better, although everywhere was locked down and closed, and all the sites had been closed. We still, the three of us, still took time to get out and about and go to places that perhaps no tourists go to at all when we had that opportunity because everything was locked down. And so this is a back street that we were staying. We had to move out of the hotel we were in because that was forced to close, although graciously they kept open for us for several weeks at a reduced rate, even though they were closed officially by the police. We moved into some flats, really a one room with an attached bathroom just around the corner at the end of this street. We just spent time there basically recuperating and dealing with stuff as it happened. It was a bit of a like, well, what happens today? Is there a flight? Is there not a flight? What's going to happen? You know?
It's weird to think of those days. I was talking to somebody about it just the other day, saying, do we remember 2020 and where we were in March and April, and nobody knew what was happening? And now you look back on it and you go, oh, so that's what it was all about. It was just another hurdle to overcome as humanity, and until the next round of whatever is about to befall us happens.
Yeah, I think so. For me, there's a lot of clarity. There's also some vagueness because I was delirious sometimes.
Right.
But I think what was important to those of us who were stuck there, and I think in total in Egypt, there were around about 40 plus people in various places around the country. But what was important to us, this group of 9 of us, was to actually look for that silver lining that was there in this huge kind of corona cloud, and find those opportunities to get out and about and to actually take advantage of what was a disastrous situation. And for some people, I know it was very difficult. They had young children who were back at home in South Africa, and I felt for those people. And as tour leader, there was an incredible degree of responsibility.
I should imagine, but as they say, the dogs bark and the caravan moves on. So let's go from the back streets of COVID-stricken Luxor to this picture.
This is the tomb of Ramos. Okay, this is in the middle of that earlier picture with the tombs of the nobility. This is in the middle of that picture, and they've just recently recovered the roof of this thing. You can see it's been reboarded up. This is just is a really interesting place because of where he sits in the history. He sits between Amenhotep III, who was the grandfather of Tutankhamun, and Akhenaten, who supposedly changed the religion of Egypt and was denounced as a heretic. And so what we have here is an interesting artistic crossover between the very standard Egyptian stuff that we all kind of know and see, those sideways pictures on the walls, to a much more fluid, realistic art form. And we see those images juxtaposed in this tomb. And it's a beautiful tomb. Lots of the pillar stuff is reconstruction. It's not the original.
Okay.
It's one of the must-sees for me, I think, because it's got these beautiful columns inside. And the artwork inside, you can't really see it here, but the artwork on the walls is exquisite. It really is. It was the height of the 18th dynasty, and their beauty was, in terms of their execution, was fantastic. It was light and delicate, whereas later the 19th dynasty, which was really the rise of Ramesses and the Ramesside dynasties, their stuff was big and crude and was making the point that we're in charge, and they lost that kind of beauty.
Is this a rear view of you entering somewhere?
It is a rear view of me entering somewhere. You're absolutely correct.
You're easily recognizable, Ted.
I think it's the hat. Maybe it's the gate. I don't know. I think it's the hat.
Yeah. So where are you?
Okay, this is in the open air museum in Karnak. Okay, Karnak is a huge again in Luxor on the east bank of Luxor. So as I said earlier, Thebes at the time, modern day Luxor, was the religious center, certainly of the New Kingdom era, and the temple complex, I think, is second only to Angkor Wat in terms of size. It's absolutely massive. And this is a section of it that's called the Open Air Museum. And this is what's called the Red Chapel. And it was constructed in the reign of Queen Hatshepsut, who came earlier than, she was just before Thutmose III, who was like a famous general and empire builder.
Right.
And what happened was while they were, because Karnak is a fascinating place because it took about 2,000 years for it to be built, because each successive pharaoh, or 1,000 maybe, each successive pharaoh added on stuff and added on, so it got bigger and bigger and bigger and larger. And this chapel had been dismantled and was actually buried away. And while they were refurbishing stuff and reconstructing bits of ancient Karnak, they discovered this and managed to get all the pieces and rebuilt it somewhere else. So it's not in its original location, but the majority of the stonework is the original stonework, which that's just fascinating to see.
I suppose if you say Egypt, and we're slowly running out of time, so I don't want to shortchange you.
No, sure.
It's the pyramids that we talk about, but this is not necessarily the way we see them. You know, we used to pristine pyramids. Where is this one?
This is an area south of Cairo called Dashur, and this is called the Bent Pyramid for obvious reasons.
For obvious reasons, yeah.
Yes, and according to mainstream Egyptology, and this predates the Great Pyramid and the pyramids at Giza. Okay, so the understanding is that this pharaoh who built this, Sneferu, he started building at a certain angle and realized, or they realized fairly quickly or halfway up, that it wasn't going to work. The angle was too steep to take the weight. And so they changed the angle and made it a lesser gradient up to the top. That's the understanding. Whether that's another huge conversation.
Have they figured out what actually or how they built these pyramids? Because these blocks, you know, are enormous, and we've all seen pictures of slaves dragging blocks on wooden rollers and that type of thing. But I mean, would they be able, let me rephrase that, would modern day engineers be able to recreate a pyramid using only that technology? Not a crane, not a drawing, not anything. There are bricks or there are blocks of rock. Now turn them into a pyramid.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think that there are lots of theories, but actually how the thing was done is certainly not cut and dried. There are references. There are papyri that have been discovered that talk about the work teams who were working on the construction. I'm talking about the pyramids at Giza.
Yeah.
About that, they've discovered entire sections on the Giza plateau that are very much a workers' environment and living space, also equipped with hospital areas, and so so there's definitely an indication that the things were built by the Egyptians. However, as to the actual how, that's not definite. The slave story has been discredited many years ago as has being hauled by elephants and whatever else.
Passing water buffalo. When the Sahara Desert was a large sea, there were water buffalo.
Well, the Sahara, that section was certainly a temperate zone in history.
Yeah.
area. But I think the greatest understanding is at where the Nile went and how close the Nile was, and they've discovered the remains of harbors right next to the pyramids. So their
Okay.
understanding is that stone from Aswan and other places
Were brought in
was
that way.
was was brought in that way. But as to the actual construction, did they start at the bottom and go round and round and round and up to the
Nobody
top?
will
Or,
know until they find the video.
well, yeah, indeed, absolutely. It's an
Ted,
open.
we're almost out of time, but before I go, I want you to tell people if they are interested in touring, is G&T Tours still operational? If so, how do people contact you, and how often do you run tours?
Um, yes, it is still operational. I'm currently planning a tour for November of this year. I think, unfortunately, the situation, without getting into the politics of it, the situation with Israel and Gaza has perhaps created a degree of concern about traveling to that part of the world, and obviously the immediate stuff with Iran and Israel as well. But I was in October. I was in Egypt last October as things were escalating, and everything was perfectly safe. The Egyptian people are very aware of how valuable tourism is to their GDP, and will take all measures to make sure everything is safe. And it was safe. I felt completely safe. There were no issues whatsoever. You can get hold of me either at Ted, TED, at gntours.co.za, or the gntours.co.za website, and I will get back to you immediately.
Great stuff. And for people who are considering going, go. It turns out that I left, Ted and I spoke before we did this interview, and it turns out that I left Egypt the day before he arrived. In fact, I flew out as he flew in. If only we'd known, we could have met at Egypt airport and had a cup of coffee
Indeed.
before I vanished. But anyway, be that as it may. And yes, I found the same sort of thing. I felt totally safe in Egypt. But other people had said to me, please come home. We don't want to be in a situation that could possibly escalate, and then we're stuck. Ted, thank you so very much for joining me. It's been fascinating talking to you. Egypt is a subject that you can talk for hours and hours, and literally scrape the surface, which is what's happening in Egypt. So people, go and have a look. G&T Tours, and if you are considering it, why not give Ted a call and take it from there? Ted, thanks very much for joining me here on In Conversation With.
Oh, thank you, David. Thanks very much, and I appreciate being asked. What an honor. Thanks very much.
Ted Loukes, who was my guest on In Conversation With.